Good news for landlords. It looks like the California state legislature won't extend the state's eviction moratorium. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have some good news for you today coming out of the state of California. It looks like the state legislature is not going to be extending the state's eviction moratorium. So when it finally comes to an end here on September the 30th, it's done. But before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know if you really think they're just going to let this thing expire. Because guess what? I don't. I believe the legislator is going to do some kind of last minute maneuvering and then really screw the landlords over who've been waiting for this thing to end. So this article comes from abc10.com and it says, out of time, California legislators won't extend eviction ban. California's eviction protections will almost certainly not be extended once they expire after September 30th, the State Assembly Housing Chairperson said today. The legislative session ends Friday, that was yesterday, so that's the last day that lawmakers could push off that deadline. But the political appetite just isn't there to act, according to David Chu, a San Francisco Democrat who spearheaded the previous efforts to stall the displacement of tenants amid the pandemic. I believed our eviction protections for tenants should be extended beyond September 30th. The Delta variant and the end of many unemployment benefits make that even more urgent, Chu told Cal Matters. Unfortunately, some of my colleagues feel differently, and there's not enough consensus for that. So, I think I've read articles about this David Chu guy before. He's one of the more progressive people in their state legislature, and he's always pushing for all this anti-landlord, pro-tenant stuff. And so it's not surprising to me that he wants to personally extend the eviction moratorium. But what is surprising to me is that he doesn't have enough other legislators to back him up on this one. And they've just decided to go ahead and let the whole thing just come to an end. So if it ended yesterday, I'm recording this on Saturday, so if it ended on Friday, then, and they've, gone into their recess, then, well, I guess it's just over. But there still is a chance that they could call a special session, or, the governor could do something, but, we'll see what happens. The current round of eviction protections were extended on June 25th, just days before they were set to expire. At that point, Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon said he hoped the economy would be in full swing so that another moratorium would not be necessary. Rendon's office declined to comment on the absence of another extension. The legislature has kind of set a trap for itself because it won't be in session when that expires, said Brian Augusta, legislative advocate for the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation, who has been lobbying for stronger protections throughout the pandemic. So that means what we see is what we get. Augusta said the governor could still call a special legislative session to extend protections before the end of the month, or issue an executive order, as he did at the beginning of the pandemic, to pause court proceedings relating to evictions. But he said that's unlikely. Actually, I don't think that's unlikely, okay? So, as you should know by now, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, he's facing a recall election, okay? So he might do something dramatic before he gets recalled to try to get votes, okay? So he might have either a special legislative session, or he might call for, an executive order just to create a new eviction moratorium, or just close the courts completely down. This wouldn't surprise me one bit. And hey, I suggest if you're in California, look for something like that happening in the next few days, because Gavin Newsom is just, he's desperate to try to stay in office, and so he's going to do whatever it takes to keep his position. So landlords might not be in the clear just yet. Now, if he is recalled, I don't know how soon a new politician would be taking office, but if he doesn't do anything the next few days, September 30th hopefully will be the day that the state eviction moratorium ends and landlords can finally get back to filing evictions against their tenants. But just being able to file evictions against your tenants in California, it isn't enough. I mean, because there are so many tenant protections in the state that just filing an eviction, it's very, very difficult still to get that tenant out of the property. So it could take months on end. You have to go through a huge, annoying process. In some cases, it's just better to actually pay the tenant to leave. And I did a poll last week about, would you be willing to pay tenants to leave your property if you weren't able to evict? And surprisingly, a lot of landlords would be willing to do that. And in certain situations, even I would be willing to do that. So in a very tenant-friendly place like California, that might be the only option that you have to actually get a tenant out of your property. Okay. The California Rental Housing Association, which represents more than 20,000 landlords and has sued the state over the last round of protections, was pleased by the decision but not surprised. Our lobbyists did not come to us and say, hey, we're going to have to compromise somewhere or anything like that, said Sin Lakireddy, a board member for Cal RHA. So I think the legislators are starting to get it as well. This can't go on ad infinity. The eviction protections in place state that tenants will have a defense in court should their landlord evict them over non-payment of rent through September 30th. They still have to submit a declaration saying they are unable to make full rent and pay at least 25% of their monthly rent since September 1st, 2020 in installments or in bulk by September 30th. So yeah, they have to pay at least 25% of their rent. So if they owed $2,000 a month, they have to pay at least $500 for every month all the way from September 2020 all the way until the current month by the September 30th to get any of these protections. And so there's a lot of tenants who aren't going to be able to do that. So I'm glad that this whole thing is finally coming to an end in California. I mean, it looks, I'm optimistic, but, things change quickly. I mean, we saw what happened up in the state of New York, okay? The eviction moratorium there was, came to an end because of a Supreme Court decision. They just basically destroyed their state eviction moratorium. And then the state brought up a new unlawful eviction moratorium, and it basically said the exact same thing as the old one. Excuse me. The protections are tied to $5.2 billion in federal aid for rent relief. People making less than 80% of their area median income who are financially affected by COVID-19 can still apply for the full amount of missed rent and stave off eviction. They can also now apply for 3 months of forward rent. But distribution of those dollars remains a problem. While the state has received applications for about $1.9 billion in rental aid, it has distributed only about $491 million, so only about 25%. Still, that's about a 500% increase since the current moratorium passed at the end of June, according to Russ Heinrich, spokesperson for the state's Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. According to a recent analysis of California's rental debt by PolicyLink, an Oakland-based research group, about 753,000 families are behind on rent and owe a cumulative $2.8 billion. Now keep those numbers in mind, okay? They said that the rental debt that's owed to landlords right now is about $2.8 billion. But then they said that only $1.9 billion in rental aid was even available, and they've already distributed $491 million of that. So there's nearly $1 billion in debt from unpaid rent that the rental assistance doesn't even cover. So the rental assistance is not a solution for a lot of landlords. It's just, it doesn't have enough money in the program to help. It's too slow. There's too much bureaucracy involved in it. So it's not the best thing for landlords. According to a recent analysis, I already read that. I think everybody's hope was that more families would have received the funds by now, and that people who didn't apply or were denied were a minority, as opposed to an overwhelming majority, said Francisco Duenas, Executive Director of Housing Now, a tenant advocacy group. Existing law has some stopgaps that, in theory, should prevent the tsunami of evictions tenant advocates and researchers have predicted. Heinrich said tenants will be shielded from an eviction procedure by the courts for 15 more days to apply for their missed rent, a provision that extends through March 2022. So yeah, there's still some protections in place for those tenants to apply. If they don't apply, though, hopefully the landlords will be able to actually get those tenants out of their properties and get paying tenants into their properties. So, yeah, this is great news for landlords. I'm really happy to hear about it. I'll reserve my happiness, part of my happiness, until after September 30th, when we're 100% sure that they're not going to pull something out their butts and then create a new eviction moratorium or somehow extend the old one. Okay, so yeah, I have my hopes up that it's coming to an end, but it's not guaranteed just yet.